everybody. Welcome back to the Inspiration Weekend. It is almost 9:30 at night here, and I have George Pullen with me from the US. Thank you so much for finding time, George. I mean, you started to inspire this whole thing in your own way as well, and I really appreciate that you found a few minutes. I took away some beach time from George, which is really unfair. As soon as you know what he does, the many things that he does, then yes, I will get some bad reverse karma points for taking beach time away. But then again, I was very jealous. I will be honest. I was just, But yes, George, you know what? Instead of me telling people what you do, I'll let you frame yourself.
Sure. So first and foremost, I'm an economist. I hold a number of roles, but one of them requires a disclosure. So I'm going to give that right now, which is that I hold a position as Senior Economist with Division Market Oversight for the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, which is a U.S. government entity. I do not represent them in this talk. These are all my personal comments. I'm really more speaking my academic capacity. So academically, I give guest lectures at a variety of schools, GW, American, also the War College, and then I also hold appointments with the Columbia program and also with the University of New Hampshire's Law School. And so particularly the University of New Hampshire's Law School, I think that fits in probably best what we're doing here today, because over there, I talk about the social impact and economics of technology. And I think when we start talking about social impacts, a lot of times mental health isn't part of that conversation, and it should be part of that conversation. So that's why I'm here, and that's why we're going to have this wonderful chat.
I mean, when we started talking, you were actually the first gentleman to validate the finance and wealth life track. So I will give you that love right away, because for me it was a huge leap of faith, and then when, of course, I further dug your credentials, I went, and so it was a big deal for us. It was a big deal for us. And, I thank you for doing that, because that was a moment when I went through a few of my Rolodex, my digital Rolodex, and I went, oh no, why are the men in particular retreating from me, from the finance industry?
And you point that out, and I don't want to make this a conversation about why men don't want to talk about mental health. Although we can, I'm totally okay, doing that.
I wasn't sure if I was complaining to you. Let's just be clear about that. Actually, I wasn't sure, because we do have these conversations at this hour, so I am relatively tired. And then when you said I teach, and the way you presented yourself, you're clearly relaxed, much more relaxed now. But
sure.
I remember you putting up, you were setting your note desk, and I could see the posture and motion. And I looked at you and I went, oh my God, I'm in class and I'm so happy to be here. I just went full on nerd. And then out of nowhere, I went, why are all the men not working with me, George? And then
well, I will tell you, it's, I wonder, first of all, it's part of that, we always have to say that we're doing okay, but even more than that, I'll make it more about, finance and economics in general.
Yes.
I will say that a lot of the, so first of all, before I, went into academia, I was at a number of banks. I worked my way up to the bank channel. I was a broker, a portfolio manager. I worked at hedge funds as a trader. So I've done the other side of the house too, besides academia. Right. And what I will say is that there's a certain personality type there. At least it was there the last time I was there. So maybe things have changed. Hopefully they have. But, no one wants to say, hey, you know what? I need a minute, or I should talk to someone, or I should check in. And then when they hear about, initiatives like this, where they can be part of something that helps other people, right? And it's specifically on something very tailored like this, they don't want to maybe self-select or self-identify. And I think it's the opposite. People have to stand up and say, you know what? This is something that needs to be talked about. And and to be a strict economist here for a second, I will say this affects businesses' bottom lines. And the fact that it's not part of businesses' conversations is a miss. And I'd also go the next step further, which is I was a little bit taken back that I know Davos was forever ago now. So I mean, January was.
When did that happen?
Yeah, that was like 30 years ago. It doesn't seem like the first.
That stressful.
Yes, it's been that kind of year. But back at Davos, ESG got all the attention.
Yes.
And I was so happy to see that. But at the same time, I was like, when we talk about ESG investments, so, environmental, social, and good governance, why aren't we talking about how mental health plays into that?
Correct.
Because definitely touches ESG.
And this is the validation I brought your way. I asked you directly, why is there no space? Is it possible? And that was the question. I put it out there, right? We went straight into SSRIs. We went straight into what the parameters are. And then we talked about GRI's way of looking at it and the discrepancies. And then, I get palpitations now thinking about, I cannot represent either side of the fence here with Brexit as well. It is just terribly, I don't know, the whole thing is conflating too much. I feel like it's going out of control. And then somewhere between it, we're not seeing take up. So we were talking about apps, about responsible investment apps. I don't want to name names because, we want to give everyone if they listen into this, an opportunity to also represent, why mental health doesn't have a subspace, right? But it is a big concerning matter. Why isn't it, deemed as such? In the technology space, though, mental health is seen largely as a disability. So yes. That is kind of, I think, shaping the conversation around price margins, shaping the conversation around, subscription business and revenue margins, right? So and I'll reference a couple of people here. First of all, just a shout out to Northwestern Mutual for having such an amazing assistant director of diversity and inclusion, Adam, who spoke about the other guy in the finance world.
There's two of us. So. There's more. They'll come. They'll come.
No comment. But one day I will put the two of you together. Maybe you do a live stream, because that will be hilarious. Somehow I managed to get the one colored gentleman and the one white gentleman, and both of you are very striking lads. So I'm gonna use that video a lot more.
Good.
But coming back to this though. In the ESG space, we're talking to Trina Histon. Another shout out for you, George. I'll send you the video if you're running around. But we talked about revenue margins. We talked about the sort of ratio of capitalism in the founders market that she's in. She's in San Francisco. She's just right by Silicon Valley, and she's looking at investments in an ethical point of view, right? We don't want to have dark metrics and stuff like that. So what's your sense for this space right now? I mean, what's your primary concern in the development of, and you cut across a lot. You cut across blockchain, you cut across.
So, right. So, yeah. So,
your tech knowledge as well.
Right. So I'm also the chief economist for the Space Channel. So I do a lot of work over there. I think there's also a lot of opportunities for, startups, technology transfer programs who want to look at what NASA's done for health of astronauts and how that could apply for, more larger scale operations. That's maybe more of a passion project than something for today's conversation, but I know there's stuff
very
there.
Relatable. Very
yeah,
relatable.
There's stuff there. I think though, what I look at when I look at the space is it does come down to it having a investment category, an investment subcategory, if you will, within ESG, because by that being part of people's conversation when we're putting forward investment. So when you're managing large groups of money, you almost always are acting on a set of investment policy statements, and that investment policy statement governs what you will or will not be invested in.
Correct.
And so if you have a certain portion of that has an ESG focus, well, if all of the oxygen in the room is being taken up by, let's say, wind turbine development, bad wind joke, oxygen. If all the oxygen in the room is being taken up by that, then there's no time for someone to say, well, we also have these, small middle tier businesses that are doing things devoted to mental health. Do those also fit within that category, that larger category of ESG? And so I think the categorization is so important. It's really much the same way. I've been working with a number of people on this who have been doing it longer than I have, about looking at the space economy, the space industry, as a unique industry and as a unique set of values and a unique set of applications that will be applied back to the larger economy. And so, I think it's the same thing when it comes to mental health. I think it looks at, okay, mental health and the way it's addressed and the way that we have companies focusing on mental health and mental wellness, how does that feed back into the economy? How does that feed back into business models? How does that feed back into investment strategies?
But at the same time, the political appetite, right? I mean, you're very much a behavioral psychologist in your own right by understanding consumption and stimulus, right? I mean, yeah, you open a pipe and this happens, and those pipes and how that that works.
Right.
But it's really interesting. I mean, the public appetite is something that has to be addressed, and economics is all about human behavior at the end of the day. But the public appetite for expenditure for space exploration right now, for example, while we're in a pandemic, I mean, the cost benefit analysis of mental health, it's just so poor. Everyone reverts back into, I think, a similar problem of niche and scale and margins, or ethics.
well, I'll be careful on the ethics one, right, because everyone can have their own ethos. So I'm not going to do an ethics one. But on behaviors, we are talking about trade-offs. And so if that means
ethical behavior is what I'm addressing. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So if you want to incentivize ethical behaviors, if you want to incentivize behaviors that are good for society or good for individuals, then this does come down to an economic calculation. And it comes down to, okay, we know, for example, that unfortunately there is a very high percentage of mental health issues in veterans, right? So I'm a Marine Corps vet, and there's a high percentage of mental illness in veterans. And if there's not services targeting that, then you have people who aren't rejoining the workforce. And then that becomes an economic question. And it's the same, I would say, for a number of other categories of individuals. So you're talking about, people who are homeless, right? So a lot of times people who are homeless are also fighting with mental illness. And so they need access to services so that they can participate in society in a meaningful way. But if they don't have access to the initial services, then they're stuck in this homelessness route. And and even and I would add a third, not to intentionally do a blockchain shout out, but I would use a third, which is, if you're looking at, the decentralization and the nature of, banking as an activity, not a bank as a place, which there's still a lot of people coming to terms with that. It also comes down to the unbanked, right? So if you have people who are, fighting addictions, fighting mental illness, they're having financial struggles, they're also unbanked. You have blockchain solutions now for the unbanked communities. I think these things, although they seem pretty disparate, they can connect, because when you're providing these layers of services to people, you can really bring them up. And it's not about this isn't charity, right? I mean, there's real reasons to do this for the good of our community, for the good of our society, and not just to help individuals, which we want to help people, but it also comes down to what this means for our world as we go forward.
I think there's definitely a huge space in the microeconomics of this, right? And there's a huge space in microfinancing and and fintech, and that's my world before, and reward modeling, right? But for me, the intriguing part is exactly what you said. This is why I love talking to you. We always meet minds at so many levels. It's just too little time, and I feel like I'm also catching up to your experience, and there's so much admiration there too. So I have to always balance it out.
It's very nice.
But I mean, microfinancing, something like what we're going to study here, is going to create so many opportunities in that perspective, because repatriation into local society, and then the sustenance of that repatriation is very much dependent on the microeconomics of a human being's surroundings and everything else that comes into that. So it's a local effort to bring someone back home and make this person a functional member of society, at least on moving that economic engine, right? And having independence and maybe a reasonable restoration of identity and meaning, right? But at the same time, where is this balance going in your opinion? Are we finding that certain, economies, so when we look at first world, third world, let's just look at that SDG, or maybe north-south, equality, right? Between regions. Do you see funding be in mental health to form this into like a sub-asset class or an identifiable category and parameters? How would we lean? Should we lean more private sector? Should we lean more public funding? What's your thoughts on crowdfunding? I mean, if you think about blockchain, it's largely also crowd sponsored support. So which way do you think the opportunities are?
I think when you're talking about countries that already have developed infrastructure, and I'll be very broad with the term infrastructure.
Very broad.
When you have a nation that already has a certain level of service being delivered in the area of mental health, you're probably looking at opportunities to either augment what's currently being delivered at a local level through advocacy, or through partnerships with private entities that want to increase a focus on a given issue, right? Because there's already the structures in place that they can then lapse to, right? Where you don't have those structures as developed, or you don't have that framework that we can put our lasses on, that makes it very tough. And so in those places, you're going to need buy-in from the power centers. Now, a power center in a place that doesn't have those systems might not necessarily be from the centers of governmental power. It might be a large company that has a exporting facility in the country,
right.
and consumers from the rest of the world might want to know that, when you're going in and you're making your products there, you're not just taking advantage of a situation, and you're also contributing to the community. So, obviously, people are going to put things like food and energy ahead of other things, exactly. but the mental welfare component does start hitting that after you have these, hierarchy of needs being met. And so when you look at the situations in those countries, it's probably going to be partnering with the power centers, which again, you might be talking about their governments, but you might be talking about larger multinational corporations that are operating those sectors.
I guess it depends which angle you go, right? I mean, if you're conscious consumption, then you're maybe private, and you're looking at greenfield investments that are a different nature altogether, right?
Well, and the greenfield stuff, I mean, this kind of goes back to, and I know we do this when we talk sometimes, but it kind of goes back to the ESG conversation earlier, and then we had before this, but it matters, right? Because it matters because when we don't, when we don't have good traceability on achieving various ESG goals. Because I'm just going to start from the assumption that mental health is going to be part of ESG. It's not yet. Right. We're going to put it in there. It's going to happen. So when we talk about measurements, though, there's such a lack of measurement overall in the sector, and there are solutions there that blockchain can provide, not only because of the way it would allow for monitoring and for transparency, but also because you can look at something you've already alluded to, the tokenization perhaps of certain activities, the tokenization of certain health metrics we want people to achieve or reach toward. And so there are toolkits there that can both help solve for, I'm investor A or I'm large company B, I'm putting this much money in, but I don't necessarily know what I'm getting back. Well, around a mental health focus, if that means that we're providing measurements back, that's huge. Because
I really want to go there. I mean, there's going to have to be, right from the onset, I wanted to sort of offer an ensemble of, maybe data lakes, right? Different data architectures coming into this. And that's something you really want to do anyways, because if we have enough solutions that are, really well at identifying prevention versus intervention, other aspects of mental health that, some aspects are somewhat metrically scalable, kind of. But when you relate to, usability or recurrence in usage or drop-off rates, that's where I think the figures don't match, and that's where it's going to get complex. But there are a lot of solutions we're coming across where there's huge potential for these, data gathering opportunities. But it's gonna boil down to e-commerce at the end of the day, because on the end of the consumer, it is still an e-commerce purchase in a lot of ways, right? So there is the component of, tangibility. There's the component of, is this really something I'm going to give, gigs on my phone from to bite into another app that's doing this for me, right? So it's really, really tough, I think. And, what do you think the reasonable expectation is when we reverse this customer lifetime value, right? Back up the funding channels. What do you want to maybe caution some of the, founders out there, to just, think about that aspect as well? Because you're an economist, who better to ask about CLV?
Well, it's going to have to be something, and I hate to be the guy who talks about numbers for the third time in a row, but I'm going to.
Sadly, there's only two of you, and I couldn't really grind it out of Adam, so you can blame Adam for this.
Okay, so it's his fault. It's his fault.
Insurance.
But we're going to need to show measure. We're going to need to be able to show measurements, and some of those measurements might be, this is the increased productivity. This is the reduced amount of recidivism. This is the decrease in homelessness. This is the increase in productivity. This is what it means to your community and what that means then for your profitability as a business. Obviously, I hate to be like this, but this is what it means for your social score as a business.
It's not hard.
This. And so all these things have to be measured.
Yeah, you could lead that crumb, the trail of crumbs.
Right
To whatever it is. I think, though, the conversation is not going to be very clear for a lot of organizations because, how many of us have been asking our investor relations?
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, that would be a nice, that's actually a great survey idea, right? So there's a work stream there where, for your organization, what's the board's bandwidth? What's the last time as a chief risk officer for an organization, or as even a chief human capital officer for an organization, that you've talked about mental health? Just what's the last time? And we can form other survey questions around this, but you can really start taking a temperature reading, because if that's not something that's even being addressed, well, let's plant a flag there. Right. Like let's provide a suite of services that says, okay, here's some things that you can plug and play into that can improve your organization. We know it'll help you here. We know that it's going to help you achieve this. And then they can look at that and say, you know what, we want these benefits. We've seen that you've been measuring these benefits, and we want to be part of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, the benefit conversation is definitely an easier one to map back to human capital. So it's not going to be hard to convince that way. But I guess, as we move into the next, 15 years, 20 years here, we're going to see it spike. World Economic Forum called this out, right? More than 50% will be attributed to mental health disease. And, it's exceeding things like cancer. And that's scary. And then, of course, the environment is literally conditioning our oxygen supply because we all behaved very badly. So,
and I'll tell you too, I mean, and you've set this up, but I'll say it that it's true. I mean, but when you look at, as we are rushing full speed into the fourth industrial revolution, and people have a tendency not to appreciate how much faster these innovations are coming, and how these innovations are actually playing off of synergies between each other, where some nascent technology might not be even in common speak, but now it's already cooperating with another technology they don't know about. This sort of rapid change is going to add stressors. And that means stressors both for individuals and for businesses and for society. And if we don't have the framework now, that's not going to look pretty in 20 years. So we need to set ourselves up with the right structures to be addressing these challenges today, when we have some time I'd argue not much, but we're better to do it now. And so, and it doesn't matter what you're talking about. If you're talking about, what 3D printing might do for manufacturing, what is going to happen when we have more automation in jobs, and so job structures change. People who can and cannot participate in the workforce in the same way are changing. Delivery of education is changing. Right. You and I were talking before this started about online school. Right. So all these things are changing.
Trust, authority, and authoritative structures. I mean, that's already destroyed. So it's really hard. And you're seeing that firsthand. You teach across board.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll tell you what's interesting about that too, on the trust angle and on the changing education, but also like the changing of our perceptions. We were going through the pilot season for my show on the Space Channel, and then COVID hit, and I was like, okay, well, I guess we're going to pack up the tables and we're done for a little bit.
Oh, I am so bummed.
But this is what I lovingly call the mission control. I'm not sure if they like the nickname or not, but what Mission Control said was, what are you talking about? Everybody is doing it from home now. So, so clean up your office and let's get going. And so clean up my office isn't easy, by the way. That's a separate thing. But the point of that is, and now when we have, whether you're watching Business Channel X or Y, I'm not going to give any shout outs, Business Channel X or Y, or you're watching the nightly news, a lot of these personalities are home. And they're coming to your home from their home. Yes. And that changes our perception of what it looks like when someone delivers us information. And it'll be the same way when I'm teaching classes. I taught classes all summer, and the same way when we're teaching classes. I'm engaging with students who are in their homes and I'm in mine. Mm-hmm. And it's not matter of here I am up front and this is what I think. No. I mean, that doesn't translate now. No. And it's going to change everything. It is. It's going to bring up a lot of questions. I hate to tangent, but I think it's a good one. It's going to bring up questions about educational equality too, right? So if I can deliver a quality education to students at school ABC, and I can do that in this format, what stops the access for other individuals, right? There's these sort of maybe arbitrary walls stopping other people from getting this education, but I can, once we do it one time, right, like you and I are right now, we're talking this first time live, right? It's that same idea, right? We've delivered this. Yeah. These ideas are out there, right? How this relates to our changing economy, how this relates to businesses improving their own metrics, how it relates to their social scores, how it relates to their workers. We've talked about how mental health is going to be part of ESG. We just, maybe not today, but it's getting there. With all of these things, we've presented them, we're laying them out. We're going to have more discussions. Obviously, there's a bunch of work spinning up from the Solveathon, but all that is deliverable one time, and then other people can access it. Exactly. And then they can carry that fire with them and those ideas and do other things. And
evolution takes place, and we just see this grow and grow and grow. I mean, this is the thing, but you have to cast a really wide net. I have casted a pretty wide net for this Solveathon, and it's interesting how people behave and how people rush to an opportunity. The aspects that trigger that kind of inclusion, I used to be in PR and branding, so I do know how to simulate a lot of public opinion, but it's a gift and a bit of a curse to know these things. And then now to do it digitally and to see how people behave and react and how authenticity comes across and accountability comes across. And, a lot of what I've learned in this little marathon of a weekend is that, don't try to be someone else. Just be who you are. Try to be authentic as possible. Come right out with it. If you don't know, just say don't know. If you're confused, just say confused. If you lost your sentence halfway, say you did. It's totally fine to balloon out. And that's okay. I think that in itself is a huge practice for mental health. And, we had some folks share very, very intimate stories here, very dark places that they've been in, and, systems that have failed. And one thing I want to validate with you, George, is the fact that, a lot of the therapists we've spoken to, from Robert Myers, shout out to New York, he's a sort of legal psychoanalyst in a sense, and he's a therapist, a clinical therapist out of Queens, and he sees a lot of intergenerational trauma and different aspects of culture and how it's changed over the years. And one thing they all validate is that the need for this right now, this therapeutic approach, this listen in and be vulnerable, and that how that relates to resilience, the new form of resilience, right? It's going to be different, maybe now for once, being a little bit flawed, a little bit disgruntled, shaken up, and it's okay. It's totally fine. And there's some opportunity there if we normalize that, or just make that preventative space go away through, I don't know, a massive amount of suicide lines, and critical access points. People can just, I need help right now, and through this cohort, we've got good promise. We've heard about text-based systems. So Ian Power, one of our judges as well, and he's, they've had 10 years of experience, and a significant amount of that experience has been running, this crisis suicide line. And then, I don't know, 2-3 days later, my list of suicide hotlines and the differences between them and how they're created for peers. Now we have about 6 of those. 6.
That's good. That's really
6.
good.
And,
really good.
Everyone's just making themselves available. So the unquantifiable part here is going to be the human component, and it's going to be the human that curates focus. And you and I are excited about taking this into the investor side of things, from the private investor to, the advanced investor, and look at maybe reverse engineering this from that point on. But I think everybody can take a slice at a mental health, right?
Yeah. And I think that's a beautiful point, because, I would never consider myself an expert in mental health, right? That's not that I've never spent time in the space to learn it. I'm not a clinician and nothing like that. But when someone says, well, here's a problem set, here are the incentives, here are the costs, here are the benefits, what does this look like, what are these structures? Those are economic questions that I feel comfortable diving into, and that they are important to dive into. And that's the same for other skill sets, right? So, whether that is, one of my, a student from one of my classes involved in blockchain who wants to, bring some of that to light, whether that's someone who has a different sort of background and skill set in finance, or wherever they're coming from.
I mean, someone like that,
they can come in.
They can address trust. They can address trust in banking, even as a use case, right? I mean, blockchain based tools are proving to be magnanimous in how they unite communities, how they unite intent. Everything has a bit of value. Let's wrap up on a nice sort of focal point. A couple focal points to think about when we, and maybe let's put this in behavioral economics terms, because mental health is, shaping consumer behavior, shaping investor behavior, shaping the behavior of, our choices in education. So keeping to that age group as well, 30 up to 35, right? What are the areas that you see, we can really improve in the behavioral economics space? A couple things that you want people to consider.
I think first off, we need to be able to quantify what the value of the spend is. And so I think, although it is wonderful that there are currently organizations devoted to these efforts, I don't know their numbers. And if your numbers are good, you should be shouting them from the mountaintops. And if you don't have numbers, let's get some. So I recently helped out with a project involved with studying the impacts of COVID on human trafficking. Okay.
Yes.
And there's a lot of overlap between mental health and human trafficking, unfortunately. And they have said that because channels have changed for both reporting, awareness, prevention, that it's up over 700% in the US right now. That's very, very alarming. But those are numbers, and we can then take those numbers and show those to people who can then provide targeted services. And so I think what this is going to come down to is, as an investor and as an economist, I need for people to be willing to share what they're being able to produce and what they're able to achieve. And then when we have that, we start building best practices books. We start being able to share these across the board with each other. And that's where we grow. So I think that's the move forward. And I think that's a move forward that people, like you were saying, that in this, 30 and under, 35 and under group, we can rally behind, because that's the type of thing that, okay, it's meaningful. What's my impact? How's this bettering society? And we have measurements for them. Absolutely. And then, ready, aim, fire, let's go. So
I think, to that point, I'm going to come out and come to you for advice in forming some sort of, comparable framework so that we can capture that. Because if we go too far out without, as you said, again, cost benefit, right? Everybody's got to prove that. If we can't even do that basic layer, I fear a lot of things will be stopped at Series B, or, not even hit Series A, or, just and the founders of these solutions, keep in mind, from my feminine point of view, right, I have an inclination to try and protect them, because if they lose that human energy or that intent or that goodwill, right, at such a tender point in your life journey, I worry if they will have the ability to stand back up strong enough, to take on what we know will be, a lot worse, actually.
Well, and we just got to tell them, stories that show them sometimes what you might have first aimed at isn't what you're going to hit, right? So, but if we're measuring along the way, we can adjust, right? So, Steve Jobs didn't set out to revolutionize phones. That's not where he started, right? He wanted to compete on desktops for teachers. He wanted to make sure that he had the best teaching computers out there, right?
And I think, with your help, I'm going to try and get to this exacting point of desire or vision, and we'll avoid using words like unicorn and because that just triggers terrible evaluation systems and
yes.
So I think priming the right context would be phenomenal, because if we can get this right and we can maybe somehow to some level inform, social medicine or base income models or guaranteed livable income models, or just take this and look at some opportunities there, because scarcity is scarcity. It's never going to go away. So I really appreciate that help from you if possible. And, thank you so much for being so candid and just helping us think through, because it's not easy. And I hope that those who look back at this video, remember us for this moment where we were just going with the flow. We started this call that way. I asked George if he would like to say anything. He said, I've got my standard modus operandi. I said, yes, click. And then after that, I said, should we have fun? And let's have fun. And every time we come on, it's like, okay. So I think there's somewhere between this. We should definitely do maybe an ESG live stream series or something to just see who's going to step up to the plate and bring that even forward. So I'm excited. Thank you so much.
Me too. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'll have you part of it.
You take care. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks.